It was one of those days that felt too perfect to be real. The sky was clear, the sun warm but gentle, and the air was filled with the smell of blooming flowers. It was the kind of day that made people stop for a moment and smile without even knowing why. For everyone gathered at the small countryside church that afternoon, it felt like the world itself had paused to celebrate love. Inside the church, soft music played as guests filled the pews, chatting quietly, adjusting their clothes, and turning their heads toward the door every few seconds. Everyone was waiting for the moment that had been 2 years in the making, the moment when the bride would walk down the aisle. At the front stood Daniel, a young man in a navy blue suit trying to keep his hands from shaking. His best friend gave him a small nudge and whispered, "Breathe, man. You've got this." Daniel laughed nervously, but his heart was racing. He had dreamed of this day since he met Lily, the woman who changed his life in ways he never expected. Lily wasn't late, but Daniel felt like every second was lasting an hour. He could hear the quiet rustle of the crowd as people turned to look at the church doors. Then, as the music changed, the doors slowly opened. There she was. Lily stood in the doorway wearing a simple white dress that shimmered softly in the sunlight. Her hair was styled loosely, and her veil framed her face in a way that made her look almost glowing. She wasn't wearing heavy makeup or jewelry. She didn't need to. Her smile said everything. When Daniel saw her, his eyes filled with tears. He whispered under his breath, "I can't believe this is real." Lily's father walked her down the aisle, his eyes proud, but a little misty. Every step she took seemed to make the room brighter. People turned to each other, smiling, whispering how perfect she looked. When she finally reached Daniel, her father gently placed her hand into his and nodded. The ceremony began with laughter, a few tears, and the soft hum of love filling the air. The pastor spoke about commitment, patience, and kindness, about how marriage isn't just about happiness, but about standing by each other through everything. As he spoke, Daniel and Lily barely took their eyes off each other. It was like everyone else had faded away. When the time came for their vows, Lily's voice trembled at first. She took a small breath and said, "From the first day we met, I knew you were the one I'd share my life with. You've been my best friend, my strength, and the calm in every storm. Today I promise to keep choosing you every single day." The crowd let out a soft sigh. Even Daniel's best friend wiped his eyes. When it was Daniel's turn, he smiled and said, "You once told me love should feel like home. I didn't understand that until I met you. You are my home, Lily. You always will be." As they exchanged rings, Lily's hands trembled slightly. The gold band gleamed under the sunlight that poured through the stained glass windows. And when the pastor finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Daniel leaned forward and their lips met. The church erupted into applause and cheers. It was a moment that seemed endless, pure joy frozen in time. After the ceremony, everyone spilled out into the courtyard, where the photographer was waiting. The newlyweds laughed as confetti rained over them, tiny paper hearts catching the light. The sound of cameras clicking mixed with laughter, and someone shouted, "Hold her hand higher, Daniel." He did, and Lily spun around, her dress flowing like a cloud. Their families hugged them tightly one after another. Daniel's mother whispered, "Take care of her." And Lily's mom said, "You two were made for each other." The photographer took them to the side for a few couple shots under a big oak tree. The tree had been there for over 100 years, and it had seen dozens of weddings. The light filtered through the leaves, soft and golden. Lily leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder and said quietly, "Can you believe it? We're actually married." Daniel smiled, kissing her forehead. "I've been waiting for this day since the first time I saw you walking into class." Lily laughed. "You mean the day I spilled coffee on you?" "That's the one," Daniel said. "Best accident of my life." They both laughed. The kind of laugh that came from years of knowing each other's stories, fears, and dreams. By the time the reception started, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky. The hall was decorated with soft lights and white flowers. Tables were filled with food, and the guests were still buzzing with excitement. The couple's first dance drew everyone's attention. A slow, simple dance, no fancy moves. Just two people swaying to a song that meant everything to them. When the song ended, Daniel whispered something into Lily's ear that made her laugh so hard she had to wipe her tears. They didn't notice that half the room was watching them with quiet admiration. People could feel it. That kind of love that didn't need to be loud to be real. The speeches that followed were full of warmth. Daniel's best friend told stories from their college days, and Lily's maid of honor shared how the two had stayed up all night once, planning their future weddings. Everyone laughed, clapped, and took photos they'd cherish for years. As the evening went on, the couple cut the cake, fed each other tiny bites, and danced with their parents. They posed for more pictures, laughing, twirling, hugging guests, completely unaware that time was passing so quickly. When the music slowed, Daniel and Lily slipped outside for a moment of quiet. They stood near the parked car that had a big "Just Married" sign hanging from the back. Tin cans rattled softly as the wind blew. Lily looked at the sky, streaks of pink and orange fading into dusk. "It's beautiful," she said. Daniel nodded. "It's like the world's giving us a good start." They stood there in silence for a few seconds, just breathing it all in. The smell of flowers, the sound of laughter from the hall, the soft chirping of crickets starting to wake. Everything felt calm, peaceful, as if nothing bad could ever happen again. Their friends soon came out carrying sparklers. "Come on, lovebirds," someone yelled. "It's time for the send-off." Lily giggled as Daniel opened the car door for her. Before getting in, she looked back at the glowing crowd behind them. People were holding sparklers high, the light reflecting in their eyes. She waved and shouted, "We love you all." Daniel started the car, the engine humming softly. The crowd cheered as they drove away, sparks lighting the night behind them. Laughter echoed down the road until it faded into the distance. Inside the car, it was quiet again. Lily took off her veil and placed it on her lap. "I can't believe how fast today went," she said softly. Daniel reached over, squeezing her hand. "I know. It's like we blinked and it was already over. But it was perfect." She smiled, leaning her head against the seat. "I don't even care where we're going, as long as it's you and me." He smiled back, glancing at her for a moment longer than he should have. "Always you and me." The road stretched out ahead, winding through fields and trees. The last bit of sunlight painted everything gold. They were headed toward a small lakeside cabin, a quiet place they'd chosen for their first night as husband and wife. It was only a 30-minute drive, just far enough to feel like an escape. As they drove, they talked about everything and nothing. About the way her cousin danced like a maniac, about how good the cake tasted, about how happy their parents looked. Daniel told her he couldn't wait to wake up next to her every morning. Lily said she couldn't wait to decorate their little apartment with photos from the wedding. The radio played softly, and Daniel reached over to turn it up. The song that came on was one of their favorites, the same one they danced to on their first date. They both laughed at the coincidence, singing along off-key but not caring. It was a perfect end to a perfect day. Two people deeply in love, driving into their future together, their whole lives waiting ahead. At that moment, there was no fear, no sadness, no thought that anything could ever go wrong. The world seemed kind, gentle, and full of promise. The night air was cool, the stars were beginning to peek through the sky, and the road ahead looked endless. Neither of them knew that in just 30 minutes, everything would change. The sky was slowly turning from gold to soft shades of purple as the newlyweds drove down the quiet countryside road. The last bit of daylight lingered on the horizon, giving the world a gentle glow that made everything look peaceful. The air smelled faintly of rain, even though it hadn't started yet. For Daniel and Lily, it felt like the perfect ending to the best day of their lives. They had just left the reception, waving goodbye to their family and friends, who were still laughing and taking pictures under the sparkler lights. The sound of cheers echoed behind them as the car rolled away, the words "Just Married" written in white paint across the back window. The wind made the ribbons dance, and the tin cans tied to the bumper clinked against the road with every small bump. Inside the car, Lily had kicked off her shoes and rested her bare feet on the edge of the seat. Her dress was gathered around her legs and she held her veil in her lap. Daniel glanced at her, smiling softly. "You look so peaceful right now," he said. She turned her head toward him, smiling back. "I'm just happy," she said quietly. "It still doesn't feel real. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and realize the wedding hasn't happened yet." Daniel laughed. "No, it's real. You're stuck with me now." Lily playfully nudged his arm. "I wouldn't want it any other way." They both laughed, and for a few moments there was only the sound of the road beneath them and the faint music from the radio. A song was playing, an old love song that Lily's father used to sing to her when she was little. She hummed along softly, and Daniel reached over, taking her hand. They had planned this drive carefully. The cabin they rented was only a short trip away, tucked between tall pine trees beside a quiet lake. They had found it online months ago, a cozy little place with a fireplace and a porch that overlooked the water. They both wanted their first night as husband and wife to be quiet, away from the noise of the city. As they drove, they talked about small things, the kind of conversations that filled the space between moments. They wondered if the guests were still dancing, if the cake had been finished, if the photographer had gotten that one perfect shot they wanted under the oak tree. Lily giggled. "Do you think my uncle will stop dancing before midnight?" "Not a chance," Daniel said with a grin. "I think he's still going strong. He might start another round when they bring out the leftovers." She laughed so hard she had to cover her mouth. Her laughter filled the car, and for a second Daniel couldn't stop smiling. That sound, her laughter, had been his favorite thing since the day they met. The road they were on was narrow, winding gently through the countryside. On one side were open fields, and on the other were thick woods that stretched for miles. Occasionally a streetlight appeared, casting short bursts of light before fading into darkness again. The air outside was cool, the kind that hinted that summer was slowly turning into autumn. They passed a small diner that was still open, its neon sign flickering in the distance. Lily looked out the window and said, "We should come back here sometime. Maybe next weekend." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, maybe after we get back from the cabin we can stop here for breakfast." She smiled at the idea, resting her chin on her hand. "I love that." The conversation drifted to their plans for the future, where they would live, how they wanted to decorate their new apartment, the trips they hoped to take together. Lily talked about wanting to plant flowers on their balcony, maybe even a small herb garden. Daniel said he wanted to build a small reading corner near the window. They talked like people who had forever ahead of them, dreaming out loud without any thought of limits. After a while, Lily grew quiet. She leaned her head against the window and watched the trees pass by. The car's headlights painted the road ahead in a soft yellow glow. Daniel reached to lower the volume of the radio. "Tired?" he asked. "Just thinking," she said, still looking out the window, "about everything today. It's like I want to hold on to every second. The way people smiled, the way the church smelled, the way you looked at me when I walked down the aisle." Daniel smiled, keeping his eyes on the road. "That moment is burned into my brain forever. I'll never forget it." Lily turned her head slightly and said, "You better not." They both laughed again, softly this time. The road curved ahead, leading through a patch of trees. A few drops of rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windshield. Daniel switched on the wipers, watching them slide back and forth rhythmically. "Looks like the weather's catching up to us," he said. "It's okay," Lily said. "It's kind of cozy, isn't it?" "Yeah," he replied. "Just you, me, and the rain." The smell of wet earth filled the air as the drizzle grew slightly heavier. The car's headlights reflected off the shiny road, making it look like a river of light stretching into the darkness. The rhythmic sound of rain mixed with the hum of the engine, creating a calm, almost dreamlike feeling. Lily started telling Daniel a story from when she was a kid, about how she used to pretend to get married to her stuffed animals when she was 5. Daniel laughed so hard that he almost missed a turn. "You're serious?" he asked. "Completely," she said. "I used to dress my dolls up in paper towels and pretend they were brides. My mom thought it was adorable." Daniel shook his head, smiling. "Well, you got your fairy tale ending after all." Lily smiled softly. "I did." They passed another sign. Lakeview Road, 10 miles. The cabin wasn't far now. The rain had eased a bit and the air smelled fresh and clean. Lily turned up the radio again and a cheerful pop song came on. She started singing along, off-key but full of joy. Daniel joined in and they both sang loudly, laughing at how terrible they sounded. When the song ended, Daniel turned to her and said, "You know, if we ever make a movie about our lives, that's going to be our soundtrack." Lily grinned. "I'll allow it, but only if I get to choose the title. What would it be?" "Love and Coffee Spilled," she said, laughing. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Perfect. Coming soon to theaters near you." The laughter faded, replaced by a comfortable silence. Outside, the night had grown darker and fog was beginning to form over the fields. The air felt cooler now, and Lily pulled a small blanket over her lap. Daniel reached to adjust the heater slightly. In that moment, everything felt peaceful again. The kind of peace that comes when you feel safe and content. When you think everything ahead of you will always be as gentle as this moment. Daniel looked over at Lily again. The way her eyes glowed softly under the dashboard light. The way her hand rested lightly on his arm. He felt a rush of love so strong it almost made his chest ache. "I'm the luckiest man in the world," he said quietly. Lily looked at him and smiled. "I was just thinking the same thing." They drove a little longer, the rain returning in soft waves. Occasionally, they'd pass a road sign or a farmhouse with its light still on. A few cars went by in the opposite direction, their headlights flashing for a second before fading into the distance. Lily yawned softly, stretching her arms. "Wake me up when we're close, okay?" "Sure," Daniel said. "We're almost there anyway." She leaned her head against the seat and closed her eyes. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently on hers. The windshield wipers moved steadily, the rain falling harder now but not enough to worry him. He hummed quietly to the song that was still playing, the same one they had danced to earlier at the wedding. As the car moved along the winding road, the world outside seemed to fade away. Just the sound of rain, the hum of the tires and the warmth inside the car, every minute brought them closer to the cabin. Closer to what they thought would be the start of a lifetime together. And yet, hidden somewhere ahead on that same road, was a bend so sharp and a patch of road so slick that it had caught many drivers off guard before. Daniel didn't know it yet, and neither did Lily. Right now, they were just two people in love, laughing, dreaming, and holding on to a perfect day that had given them everything they had ever wanted. The rain kept falling, softly and steadily as they disappeared into the distance. The rain had started falling a little harder now, turning from a soft drizzle into steady drops that danced on the windshield. The wipers kept moving back and forth, their rhythmic motion almost hypnotic. The sound of rain on the car roof created a calm, soothing hum. For a while, Daniel and Lily didn't speak. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that only people deeply in love can share. Lily had drifted off to sleep. Her head rested gently against the window, her face relaxed, her breathing steady. Daniel smiled every time he glanced at her. Even in sleep, she looked happy, like she was dreaming something sweet. The road ahead was mostly empty. Every now and then, another car passed in the opposite direction, their headlights flashing for a split second before disappearing into the darkness. The rain made the road shine under the beams of the headlights, and the faint mist that hung over the fields gave everything an almost dreamlike glow. Daniel kept his hand lightly on the steering wheel, humming quietly to himself. His mind wandered back to the wedding, the laughter, the music, the vows. It all felt like a blur now, like a memory he'd want to replay over and over again. He thought about the look on Lily's face when she walked down the aisle, how her eyes had locked onto his. That moment, he told himself, was the best one of his entire life. He reached over and turned down the radio slightly. The soft sound of a love song played in the background, one of those gentle tunes that fit perfectly with rainy nights. He didn't even notice when his eyes began to blur slightly from the lights reflecting off the wet road. He blinked and focused again, reminding himself to slow down just a little. Up ahead, the road began to curve slightly. A yellow sign warned of a sharp turn, but Daniel knew this route. He had checked it earlier that week. It wasn't dangerous, not really. Just narrow with a few tight bends. He eased off the gas and kept driving carefully. Outside, the rain grew heavier for a few minutes. The sound became louder, almost like a drumbeat on the roof. The wipers struggled to keep up. Daniel leaned forward a bit, squinting at the road ahead. He thought about waking Lily, but she looked too peaceful. He smiled to himself. "Sleep, my love," he whispered softly. "We'll be there soon." The road wound through a stretch of forest, tall trees rising on both sides. Their branches swayed gently in the wind, drops of water falling from the leaves like tiny sparks in the headlights. Occasionally, a flash of lightning brightened the sky, followed by distant thunder. Daniel felt a small chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from the quiet beauty of it all. The world felt huge and silent, like it belonged only to them at that moment. He thought of how lucky they were. So many people searched their whole lives for a love like this, and here they were, married together, driving toward their future. A few minutes later, the rain began to lighten again. The windshield cleared up and Daniel relaxed a little. He turned the heater up a notch to keep the inside warm. The faint smell of rain mixed with the sweet scent of Lily's perfume. As he drove through another bend, he saw a pair of headlights in the distance. It looked like a truck coming from the opposite direction. He could see it far off, its lights glowing faintly through the rain. Nothing unusual, just another traveler on a wet night. Daniel adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, staying to his side of the road. The truck seemed to be coming a little faster than it should on such a wet surface, but he didn't think much of it. Maybe the driver was trying to get home quickly before the rain worsened. Lily stirred slightly in her sleep and mumbled something, her hand twitching. Daniel smiled again and reached over to gently brush her hair from her face. "Almost there," he whispered softly. But then as he turned his attention back to the road, he noticed something strange. The truck ahead appeared to be drifting slightly toward the middle line. He blinked, unsure if it was just the rain making it look that way. He slowed down a little, his heart beating faster now. He blinked again. No, it wasn't the rain. The truck was swerving. Daniel gripped the wheel tightly. "Come on, buddy, stay in your lane," he muttered under his breath. He eased his foot off the gas completely, his eyes locked on the approaching headlights. The rain made the road slippery, and the truck's tires threw up waves of water as it moved. Daniel's heart was racing now. The truck veered slightly again, this time crossing the center line for a split second before jerking back. He could tell the driver was struggling to control it. "Please don't lose it," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Lily stirred again, opening her eyes halfway. "What's wrong?" she murmured sleepily. "Nothing, sweetheart," Daniel said quickly, trying to sound calm. "Just some rain. Go back to sleep," but inside he was no longer calm. The truck was getting closer and it wasn't steady. He could see it fishtailing slightly as it came down the hill. Daniel started to slow down even more, his hands tight on the steering wheel. The rain picked up again suddenly, pounding hard against the car roof. The wipers moved frantically, but visibility dropped to almost nothing for a few seconds. It was one of those sudden bursts of rain that make you feel blind for a moment. Daniel's heart pounded harder. He could barely see the road. The headlights of the truck seemed to blur, glowing unnaturally bright through the curtain of rain. He blinked and leaned forward, trying to see clearly. Then, through the rain and mist, he saw it. The truck had crossed completely into their lane. "Lily," he shouted, his voice breaking through the quiet. She jerked upright, eyes wide, confusion written across her face. "What's happening?" Daniel's instincts took over. He turned the steering wheel sharply to the right, trying to get off the road. The tires screeched, slipping slightly on the wet asphalt. The car began to slide, the sound of rubber and rain mixing in the air. Lily gasped and grabbed the edge of her seat. "Daniel!" He tried to steer back, his mind racing, his pulse pounding in his ears. For a split second, he thought he had control again. But the road was too slick, the rain too heavy. The car skidded toward the edge of the road. The headlights of the truck grew brighter, closer, almost blinding. Then everything seemed to slow down. Daniel could see Lily's face, frightened but trusting, as she reached for his hand. He gripped hers tightly. "It's okay," he said softly, even though his voice trembled. "I've got you." The truck's tires screeched. It tried to correct its path, swerving back toward its lane. But the road gave it no mercy. It slid sideways, spraying water and mud. The last thing Daniel saw before closing his eyes was the blur of lights rushing toward them. The world filled with the sound of rain, wind and the screech of tires, and then silence. A few moments later, all that was left was the sound of the rain continuing to fall, quietly and endlessly on the empty road. The rain began to ease again. As if the storm itself had grown tired, the road was still and empty except for the faint glow of headlights flickering through the mist. A man driving a few minutes behind saw the lights and slowed down. He noticed the truck tilted slightly off the side of the road, one of its doors hanging open. Then he saw the small car a few meters away, its front pushed against the ditch, its ribbons still fluttering weakly in the rain. The man pulled over immediately, his hands trembling as he reached for his phone. "There's been an accident," he said, his voice shaking as he called for help. "Please, hurry." He ran toward the car, shouting, but the rain muffled his voice. As he got closer, he saw the "Just Married" sign still hanging on the back window, wet and torn but still readable. He froze for a moment, his breath catching in his throat. Sirens echoed in the distance a few minutes later, flashing lights reflecting off the wet road. Rescue workers arrived quickly, their voices calm but urgent. The rain had stopped completely by then, leaving behind an eerie quiet. The world, which had been full of laughter and love just an hour earlier, now stood still, as if even the night didn't know how to move on. The rain had finally stopped, but the smell of wet earth lingered in the air. The road was quiet again, except for the distant sound of sirens slowly fading away. The flashing red and blue lights painted the dark trees in shifting colors, flickering against the puddles on the ground. The once beautiful "Just Married" sign now hung loosely, torn at the edges, swaying gently in the cool breeze. The rescue workers moved carefully, their boots splashing in the shallow water along the edge of the road. Their voices were calm but heavy, as if each word carried the weight of the night. A few of them exchanged silent glances, the kind that only people who have seen too many tragedies share. Inside the small car, everything was still. The ribbons tied to the side mirrors were damp and faded now, no longer dancing with the joy they once carried. The music that had been playing earlier was still faintly audible, the radio humming the last few lines of a love song that had almost finished before the accident happened. One of the rescue officers reached into the car to turn it off, the song fading into silence. For a moment, all that could be heard was the soft patter of water dripping from the trees above. Down the road, the driver of the truck sat on the ground, his hands trembling. He was in shock, his face pale under the flashing lights. A paramedic spoke to him gently, asking questions, checking if he was hurt. But his eyes were fixed on the wreckage a few feet away. He kept whispering something under his breath over and over, as if trying to make sense of what had happened. "I didn't see them. The rain. The road was wet. I tried to stop." His voice broke with every word. He had tried, and that much was clear. The marks on the road told the story. The long, curved skid lines showed where he had lost control, where the tires had slid across the slick surface before everything collided. More emergency vehicles arrived, their lights adding to the glow that illuminated the once dark road. A small crowd had started to gather, drivers who had pulled over, drawn by the flashing lights and the sound of sirens. They stood quietly, holding their phones close but not taking pictures. There was something sacred about the scene, something too heavy for curiosity. Among the onlookers was an elderly couple who lived nearby. They had heard the crash from their porch. The woman held her husband's arm tightly, her eyes filled with tears. "It sounded like thunder," she whispered, her voice shaking. Then silence. Her husband nodded, unable to speak. When the tow trucks arrived, the rescue team began their work with care and patience. They didn't rush, even though time always feels fragile in moments like these. Each movement was gentle, respectful, like a silent promise to the people they were helping. The road that had carried laughter and love less than an hour ago now carried sorrow. The small decorations that once symbolized joy, the streamers, the flowers, the notes of congratulations, were scattered across the wet ground. A ribbon lay caught in a bush, fluttering faintly in the wind as if waving goodbye. Back in town, word started to spread. At first, it was just whispers, a message from one person to another, uncertain and hesitant. "Did you hear about the Newlyweds?" someone asked quietly in a diner. There was an accident, just after they left the reception. Within an hour, the news reached the families. Lily's parents were still at the venue, helping clean up, when a police officer arrived. His face said everything before his words did. The laughter that had filled the hall only moments earlier fell into silence. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor echoed as people turned toward the door. Her mother's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the table. "No," she whispered. "No, please tell me that's not true." The officer's voice was low, respectful, but firm. "There's been an accident. We're doing everything we can." Daniel's parents arrived soon after, their faces pale with disbelief. Daniel's father ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth, repeating, "This can't be happening. Not today. Not them." Friends who had been dancing only an hour ago stood frozen, their faces drained of color. Someone dropped a glass, and the sound of it shattering on the floor made everyone flinch. The DJ, who had been packing up his equipment, sat down quietly on the edge of the stage, staring at the empty dance floor. Outside, the decorations were still up. The fairy lights twinkled softly, unaware of the heartbreak unfolding beneath them. The wedding cake half eaten, still sat on the table surrounded by plates that hadn't been cleared. The hall smelled faintly of flowers and vanilla frosting. It was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives. Instead, it became the one no one would ever forget, for all the wrong reasons. Back at the crash site, the rain had stopped completely now. The air felt cold and still, almost respectful in its silence. The rescue team worked quietly, communicating in short, careful words. They moved as if time itself had slowed, every action deliberate, gentle, human. When they finished their work, one of the officers walked a few steps away from the scene and looked up at the sky. The clouds were breaking apart and a few stars were visible again. He took a deep breath and whispered something under his breath, though no one could hear what it was. By dawn, the road had been cleared. Only faint marks remained. Tire tracks, a few pieces of broken glass, and a single white ribbon lying in the mud. The sound of birds began to fill the air again as the first light of morning touched the trees. At the church where they had said their vows just hours before, the doors were still decorated with white flowers. The candles from the ceremony had burned down to their last flickers. The photographer's camera bag still sat in the corner, full of pictures from a day that had started with such joy. Later that morning, the local news shared the story. The headline read, "Newlyweds tragically killed in crash minutes after wedding ceremony." The article was short but heartbreaking. It described the young couple, their love story, and how the rain had played a role in the accident. People across the town read it with heavy hearts. Some cried quietly over their coffee. Others whispered prayers. Even strangers who had never met the couple felt the weight of the story. It was the kind of tragedy that reminded everyone how fragile life could be. At the reception hall, family and friends returned the next day to collect belongings. The flowers had already started to wilt, their petals drooping. A few guests walked around in silence, picking up items that had been left behind: a jacket, a forgotten bouquet, a pair of shoes left near the dance floor. On one of the tables, someone had left a wedding card unopened. It was addressed simply to the new Mr. and Mrs. No one could bring themselves to open it. That evening, people began gathering near the accident site. Word had spread quickly through social media, and by sunset, dozens of candles lined the edge of the road. Some brought flowers, others photos of the couple from the wedding. A few left small notes, words of love, disbelief, and sorrow. One note, written in shaky handwriting, read, "You showed us what true love looks like. You'll never be forgotten." The man who had witnessed the accident came to. He stood quietly, his hands in his pockets, looking at the spot where it all happened. He hadn't slept since that night. He kept thinking about the way the rain had fallen, soft, then suddenly strong, and how quickly everything had changed. When reporters came by to ask for interviews, most people didn't want to speak. The town wasn't looking for attention. It was mourning. They weren't just grieving the loss of two lives. They were grieving the love story that had ended too soon. Back at their families' homes, both houses were filled with relatives and neighbors bringing food, hugs, and quiet support. But no words seemed enough. The walls were covered with wedding photos, pictures from just hours before showing smiles that now broke everyone's hearts. Daniel's mother sat by the window, holding one of the photos in her hands. "Look at them," she whispered to no one in particular. They were so happy. You could see it in their eyes. Lily's father, sitting nearby, nodded slowly. "They loved each other more than anything," he said softly. "And they'll always be together. That's what I'm holding on to." Outside, the sun began to set again, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, the same colors it had been on their wedding day. For a moment it felt as if the world was pausing once more, just like it had during the ceremony, to honor their love. And though their time together had been heartbreakingly short, the love they left behind continued to echo, in every memory, every photograph, and every heart that had witnessed their story. The days that followed felt unreal. The small town that had been filled with joy only a week earlier now carried a quiet sadness that everyone could feel. The streets looked the same, but the mood had changed. People spoke softly in shops and cafes, their words weighed down with sympathy and disbelief. In the corner bakery, where the couple had ordered their wedding cake, the owner wiped her eyes as she boxed pastries for a customer. They came in here together just last month, she said quietly, so full of excitement. They couldn't stop smiling. She paused, shaking her head. Life can be so unfair sometimes. At the flower shop across the street, the florist had saved 2 small white roses. She couldn't bring herself to sell them. Instead, she placed them in a glass jar near the window, beside a handwritten note that read, "In loving memory." People passing by often stopped and stood there for a moment, just staring at the simple tribute. As the week went on, the families began planning the memorial service. It was the hardest thing any of them had ever done. Every decision felt heavier than words could express. The music, the photos, the flowers. All of it had been chosen for a wedding just days before. Now it was for a farewell. They decided to hold the service at the same church where the couple had exchanged their vows. It felt right, even if it was painful. The church still carried traces of that happy day. Ribbons tied to the benches, a few petals from the wedding bouquet caught between the floorboards. The candles had been replaced, but the air still smelled faintly of roses and perfume. On the morning of the service, the sky was overcast again. The clouds hung low, as if the heavens themselves were mourning. People arrived quietly, dressed in dark colors, holding hands, holding tissues, holding onto each other. Inside, soft music played in the background, the same song that had played during their first dance. As it filled the church, people began to cry. Not because of the tragedy alone, but because they could feel the love in every note. Photos lined the front of the room. Smiling faces, laughter frozen in time. From the wedding, from vacations, from simple days spent together. They looked so full of life, so unaware of what was coming. And in every picture, they were holding hands. When the service began, the pastor spoke with a calm, gentle voice. He didn't try to explain the unexplainable. Instead, he spoke about love, how it doesn't end even when life does. He reminded everyone that the couple's story, though short, had touched countless hearts. Sometimes, he said, the most beautiful lives are the ones that shine the brightest, even if only for a moment. Family members took turns speaking. Lily's sister stood at the front, her voice trembling. They were the kind of couple that made you believe in love again, she said softly. You could see it in the way they looked at each other. They weren't just partners, they were best friends. Daniel's best friend followed, holding a folded piece of paper. He once told me, he began, that marrying her was the best decision he'd ever made. He said even if life gave them only one day together, it would still be worth it. The church fell silent. The words hung in the air like something sacred. After the service, people gathered outside under the cloudy sky. A group of young friends released white balloons, each one carrying a short message written in pen. Words of love, memories, goodbyes. As the balloons floated upward, the clouds slowly began to part, and a soft ray of sunlight broke through. Someone whispered, "Look at that." The sunlight fell directly over the church's entrance, warming the steps where the couple had once stood as newlyweds, surrounded by cheers and confetti. It felt like a sign, quiet, gentle, but undeniable. That evening, the families went back to their homes. The houses were filled with flowers, cards, and visitors offering comfort. But when everyone had left and the lights were low, the silence returned. It was the kind of silence that